Welcome to this first meeting of Intensive Study Group. I have seen some new faces, so let me just give you a brief background about this group. Basically, the idea of formation of this group came to me after seeing that there are so many decisions which are coming and information is coming through various channels, from various magazines, from various inputs are receiving from various websites. But somewhere, because of our professional commitment and lack of time, we are not able to go in depth in each decisions. So though there are other groups already which are organizing these types of programs where information is given, but I felt that there is requirement of a group where a person has the zeal to understand in depth a particular decision, why it is so. Apart from it, at the same time, the participant also has to raise their query, understand it from their point of view, how this decision could have been different, or if some facts are changed, what will be the result, and give the input in this particular group. So with this background, this group was formed with the purpose to have an extensive study of a particular decision at length, understanding what is the past precedent, understanding what are the arguments put forth, and why the court was convinced to render a particular decision. With this idea, we had formed this small group, and this is the first meeting of this group in this year. And we have today with us a very learned speaker and very dear friend of mine, Shri Rahul Haqqani, who is a practicing advocate and also a chartered accountant. He is presently working with Dr. K. Shivram, senior advocate, and he is practicing before Supreme Court, High Court, Tribunal, and before Lower Authority of Income Tax Department, and also involved in lot of public interest litigation. He is also dealing in civil matters and other litigations in law. With this, I welcome Rahul Haqqani to this first meeting of Intensive Study Group. Rahul has prepared extensive notes, slides, which we have circulated, and with this he will deal with various decisions. Basically, what we do before the meeting, 2 days or 3 days before, we email the decisions to all the members. It might have happened that few members might have not received this mail due to there was some technical problem from our office side, due to which all the decision we could not mail to all the members, but henceforth the decisions will be received few days prior to our meeting, so that the members can go through the decisions and can raise and participate in this particular group. One more aspect of this group, let me tell you that we invite the speakers out of this group. So the next time somebody from this group will have to lead here. We don't invite from any speakers from outside. Every member has to participate, has to contribute here, and one of you will have to come here once and lead this particular group. With this, I hand over the session to Rahul.
Thank you, Ajay.
I am already here.
Thank you, Ajay. Good evening, friends. We'll try to make the session as much interactive as possible. Otherwise, going through a decision is a very dry subject per se. So, we'll start. The first decision is of the Gujarat High Court in the case of Cortec Energy Private Limited. Now, what essentially the decision says, it is a decision pertaining to section 14A, and it says that if there is no exempt income, then in that case 14A will not apply. Now, how many of you feel that without going into section 14A, that if there is no exempt income, no interest or other expenses pertaining to investments which could have generated exempt income, should not be disallowed? So, but what do you feel that? Do you feel it should be disallowed or not disallowed? Should not be.
If you see the history before 14A,
Yes.
this was always getting allowed. It was
Yes.
no issue why it was not disallowed. We had many Supreme Court, and then 14A created a new chapter as such. Though it is a section, it created a new chapter, and the whole thing started changing. Now, if you compare what is the genesis of 14A, when you come to that, you feel that Rajasthan State Warehousing, where that this exempt income is there. Now, when there is no exempt income, as a logical conclusion, there should not be any disallowed.
As you mentioned,
Yes.
that earlier it used to be allowed,
Yes.
even if there was no income.
Even if
Correct.
we had
So take the corollary, why, if there is no income, it should not be disallowed? By the same logic, right? Anyhow, we'll now see the section. I'll just put the section because the relevant portion is 14A1, which really deals with this issue. It reads, no deduction shall be allowed in respect of expenditure incurred by the assessee in relation to income which does not form part of the total income under this act. Now, after reading this section, does the mind change that it uses the word like incurred in relation to wide terms, that even if there is no exempt income, there should be some disallowance?
The mind should change because it says it does not form part of the total income. If there is no income, the question is whether your income in relation to that income. That argument is possible. But of course, that Rajendra Prasad movie,
Yes.
the game-based special bench relied on that only.
So earlier you said it should not be disallowed.
Should not
Now
be.
you are saying it should be disallowed.
No, should not be.
Should not be. Same standard.
Income will always include the loss.
Yes.
Here there is no loss, there is no income.
No exempt income.
You have exempt income. You don't have, supposing you were taxable income. You didn't have any income in that year.
Yes.
So you had a loss.
Correct.
Similarly, just because you have one source of income which is taxable one source, you put everything in the taxable source. So exempt income that particular year has a loss if you don't have an income.
Yes.
It's a question of exempt income. You are talking about dividend, etc. So if that is not there, then
And if you see the wording here, you cannot take income as a net income. Here you will have to take income as a gross income. That is, there is something,
Okay.
then disallowance is there, else not.
So there is no income, there should be no disallowance.
And also the one
Here it
does.
says no deduction shall be allowed with respect of expenditure incurred by the assessee in relation to income. If there is no income,
Now,
there is no expenditure.
yes. Now as you go on Rajendra
Also the
Prasad
one does,
Modi,
which is in the present tense.
correct.
So
Correct.
future income.
So now let us, like as everyone reads on the term does not. It is not only does but does not.
Yes.
According to me, if we accept this interpretation, it means does not would refer only to an exempt income, which means that there is an income which can become a part of the total income, and if such income is not there, then it does not become part of the total income, and therefore 14A will not apply. Correct. Now let me put it otherwise also. Would does not also imply that suppose something cannot be included as a part of the total income, and if that something is not there, then also there is nothing which forms part of the total income under the act. For instance, if during a year there is no dividend, because there is no dividend, it does not form part of the total income. So according to me, or just as a discussion, does not would otherwise have two limbs. One is the exemption and one is also the absent income. That can be an argument. We are on a case law which says that it cannot be disallowed, but see, does not would have both. Like for instance, I have a dividend income, as we all understand, which is exempt, and because it does not form part of the total income, 14A is not applicable. Similarly, if there is non-existence of dividend income, then again such a non-existent income cannot form part of the total income, and therefore again 14A should apply.
No, it is non-existent of an income. It's not a
Yes.
question of non-existent of an exempt income.
So therefore, what essentially arises the question is whether this 14A touches on the source of the income, expenditure in relation to a source of the income, or only the income per se. Because if one sees 14A, it also does not say income earned. It does not say in relation to income earned. It only says in relation to income which does not form part of the total income under the Act. Now we know that there was a special bench in the case of Chem Invest, Delhi special bench, which said that even if there is no income, 14A would apply.
No, I think once you have an income, there is a connotation of receipt.
Yes.
You cannot have it. As you are arguing, it should be an earned income. I think that's not required. Once you say income, in my opinion, the most important phrase is in relation to the income.
Yes.
So unless there is an income, there is no reduction.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes. That is, I'm not saying that is also a possible view.
first is
I'm only
income
giving a
is not
counter
earned.
view.
This is a presumptive thing. For a taxation, income has to be earned. You cannot tax presumptive income except in certain cases. So income definitely
Correct.
connotes the earned income.
Now when you invest in an investment, suppose you borrow money and you invest. Now the objective of that borrowing is to earn dividend and exempt income, right? So should the source of income be ignored for the purpose of section 14A, wherein you claim the interest?
Very clearly.
Sorry?
And whatever is said, you have to read plainly.
Correct. So even plainly,
Objective is,
even plainly,
no deduction would be allowed if your objective is to earn an income which is not going to form a part of the total income.
correct. So as I said, that even if you don't earn a dividend income, it still would not form part of the total income, right?
Now it should be an income. Read it in this way.
In relation to income,
There should be an income which is not part of.
Correct.
See, there should be an income which is not part of the total income.
So would you agree that there is some sort of an ambiguity?
No, I don't see it.
What you're trying to say is expenditure incurred for by the SSE in relation to income. There could be, we are looking at from the narrow point of getting it out of in some way or the other. If you look at the main purpose, I could incur whenever I try to earn a taxable income. Do I start earning the income on the first year itself? No. Okay. So I have incurred an expenditure for an income. It could be taxable or not taxable. Then it says income which does not
No,
form
but
part of the total
for
income.
14A, as you said, rightly said, we won't earn income. But for 14A, what we have to also see, or what one should also see, is the objective with which you have made the investment. And if the objective is to earn dividend income or to hold investments for a longer time, then shouldn't 14A be invoked just, or it should not be invoked just because you have not received income. Just we used to argue that because I have not received any income, it doesn't mean expenses should not be allowed.
I support this
Similar.
condition.
No, support. No. If you support, then you are changing your mind. But of course, therefore I said it is not, the language of the section is not very clear. I'm not.
Income, there should be a first income. It is
Correct.
in relation to income.
Correct.
Not for the purpose of income.
So first, according to you, we should see the income.
Yeah.
If there is no income, then we should not even go to the expenditure side.
No, if there is no income, no question of considering anything else.
Yes. So only we have to see the
Yeah.
income side. If there is no
Then
income,
you consider-
let us not go to the debit side. Let us not go to see whether any
They are not
expenditure
saying that the
is incurred or not.
Incurred for the purpose of earning income.
Okay.
It is in relation to it.
You said borrowing and
Borrowing for the
earning
purpose of
dividend.
business.
And you said for earning dividend you are borrowing. But maybe in case of stock in trade, that dividend is incidental.
Stock in trade is a different issue.
No, so not necessarily that borrowing always we should look restrictive that.
So according to you, 14A does not apply on stock in trade?
Yeah, should not.
Huh?
Yeah, should not apply.
No, but there is a special bench which says it applies.
Daga, but how far
No,
is
not
that?
Daga. There is a recent DH Securities. Third member is there.
Okay.
But-
But no, that third member DS security.
You don't believe that
But then
third?
arguments were not there. And the High Court, the CCI and all that other High Courts have also come.
But for us, till the tribunal level, we
I
have
know,
to follow
but
that.
then,
Okay.
what we have to stand, what will stand the test of the scrutiny of the court in
Correct.
future. That also we have to discuss.
Correct, correct.
Yes,
Therefore,
I know,
no, therefore I am discussing the section because otherwise the case law in one line it says 14A does not apply if there is no exempt income.
But I am
Yes.
saying we are discussing in
Correct.
principle.
But how far that is also correct when they are applying that DS security, when there is a CCI
Correct, correct.
and High Court, though it will be our non-jurisdictional High Court,
Yes, it has to be followed.
carries more weight according to
Yeah.
It has to be followed. Correct. Okay, so now we'll just go to the judgment. So before the Gujarat High Court, the substantial question of law was.
So what is your view?
Huh?
I mean, both-
We'll decide in the end now what it should be a consensus view I feel in the end. Whether the appellate tribunal has
Which consensus you are the most successful group leader?
on this issue,
You will be repeated next 10 times.
on this issue,
Over any issue.
on this issue. Okay. See, now the whole mood of the nation is towards consensus. So maybe we'll reach.
Let us try to resolve that, come to that level.
whether the appellate tribunal has substantially erred in deleting the addition made under 14A despite the fact that the assessee had made investment and has also claimed interest expenses. The learned AO has only disallowed proportionate expenses under 8D2 to 3, that is that administrative. Now in this case, the CIT appeal went on the argument that there were mixed funds and that indisputably according to the CIT appeal some borrowed funds had gone toward investments which could have yielded dividend, and therefore just because there is no dividend it doesn't mean that 14A will not apply. And secondly, that was his second argument, since appellant made investment in shares which will result only in dividends which are exempt from tax, not receiving any exempt income during the year will not entitle the appellant to claim expenses relating to investments which will result only in exempt income. Therefore, in the absence of clear-cut details of utilization of funds, the formula given in Rule 8D, which is mandatory this year, is to be applied. Then the matter travelled to the tribunal. The tribunal first relied on a 2009 decision of the Punjab and Haryana High Court in the case of Winsome Textile Industries Limited, wherein the Punjab and Haryana High Court had held that where the assessee did not make any claim for exemption, Section 14A would have no application. In this case also, the assessee has not claimed any exempt income in this year. Therefore, respectfully following the judgment of the Punjab and Haryana High Court, the tribunal deleted the addition. Now, before the High Court, the argument of the department was that Rule 8D, since it is in place, Rule 8D will apply irrespective of whether you have received any dividend or not. We will go to the findings of the High Court. It says, subsection 1 of Section 14A provides that for the purpose of computing total income under Chapter 4 of the Act, no deduction shall be allowed in respect of expenditure incurred by the assessee in relation to income which does not form part of total income under the Act. In the present case, the tribunal has recorded the finding of fact that the assessee did not make any claim for exemption of any income from payment of tax. Therefore, what the High Court essentially has taken the test is, you first see the exempt income. There is no exempt income. Don't really bother to go into what is the expenditure incurred on investments on which you could have or could not have earned exempt income. Then it affirms the decision of the tribunal because the tribunal had relied on a High Court decision. Now going to the decision of the Punjab and Haryana High Court in the case of Winsome Textiles. In this case, up to the CIT appeals, the entire argument was whether borrowed funds have gone into the investments or not. That was the whole argument. The argument really did not revolve around the fact whether dividend is earned or not earned. However, the tribunal held that 14A and 36(1)(3) are independent. Hence, even if something is allowed under 36(1)(3), as we had already discussed, sir had said Rajendra Prasad Modi and all cases where they said 57, irrespective of income you can get it, but they said no, still disallowance under 14A can be made. It also did not go into the fact of whether there is an exempt income or not. Now we will come to the finding of the High Court. So therefore we will see, initially the High Court does not mention anything about this issue or even discuss Section 14A. So they say we do not find any merit in this submission. The judgment of this court in Abhishek Industries was on the issue of allowability of interest paid on loans given to sister concerns without interest. It was held that deduction for interest was permissible when loan was taken for business purpose and not for diverting the same to sister concern without having nexus with the business. The observations made therein have to be read in that context. In the present case, admittedly, the assessee, then in the last, they just go. Admittedly, the assessee did not make any claim for exemption. In such a situation, Section 14A could have no application. So, they say 14A would not have application. This was followed by the Gujarat High Court. And then recently, the Punjab and Haryana High Court has been reiterated by the same High Court by its decision on 2nd April, wherein they laid down the 4 tests or the 4 aspects of 14A which has to be considered for this issue. First, they say that there must be income taxable under the Act, that this income must not form part of the total income under the Act, that is, it should be an exempt income, that there must be an expenditure incurred by the assessee, so there has to be an actual expenditure. And last, they say that the expenditure must have a relation to the income which does not form part of the total income under the Act. So unless there is an exempt income, 14A will not apply. Now with this decision, with the decision of the Gujarat High Court, there was also a decision of the Allahabad High Court on the same point, which has been rendered by the Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court, who was also the judge of the Bombay High Court, in the case of Shivam Motors. Now you'll see why I have taken this decision is because till now, the decision of the special bench or Chem Invest or the High Court have not taken this issue as a debatable issue. They have simply given the finding, well, this is how we read, this is how we say. Therefore, I have taken this decision because this decision refers to the controversy also, to some extent. Here the question of law was again,
The judge was the same who had decided Godrej.
yes. The substantial question of law was whether on the facts and in circumstances of the case and in law, the ITAT was justified in upholding the decision of CIT appeal in deleting the disallowance under 14A, ignoring the fact that there is difference of opinion of various courts on the view taken by the ITAT in the absence of tax-free income, no disallowance under 14A can be made. Now what the High Court has said, it says, Section 14A of the Act provides that for the purpose of computing the total income under the chapter, no deduction shall be allowed in respect of expenditure incurred by the assessee in relation to income which does not form part of the total income under the Act. Hence what Section 14A provides is that if there is any income which does not form part of income under the Act, so there has to be some income, tangible income, positive income. The expenditure which is incurred for earning the income is not an allowable deduction. For the year in question, the finding of fact is that the assessee had not earned any tax-free income. Hence, in the absence of any tax-free income, the corresponding expenditure could not be worked out for disallowance. Now, while giving this finding, of course, the question was there are difference of opinions, but no opinion is considered directly a finding has been rendered. So, we'll just see what was the issue before the ITAT in this case. So, before the ITAT, we will see issue before the ITAT. The issue before the ITAT was the special bench in the case of Chem Invest versus ITO. It held that disallowance can be made in a year in which no exempt income has been earned or received by the assessee, where the assessee has incurred the expenses for earning exempt income. Now ITAT has given its finding because now the ITAT had to distinguish the special bench also because it has decided in favor of the assessee. So what they said is, as per the provisions of 14A, no deduction shall be allowed in respect of expenditure incurred by the assessee in relation to income which does not form part of the total income under this Act, meaning thereby the basic condition precedent for invoking the provisions of Section 14A is that there should be income which does not form part of the total income under this Act. Thus, wherever the assessee earned the interest-free income, the corresponding expenditure incurred in earning that income is to be disallowed. In the absence of any interest-free income, that is tax-free income, there cannot be any disallowance as no corresponding expenditure were incurred to earn a particular tax-free income. Now they relied, we'll see point 3, they say that they relied on a decision of a tribunal in the case of Siva Industries, and by relying on this decision they did not follow the decision of the special bench. Now what Siva Industries had done, I am taking all these decisions because it may so happen that if one side's Gujarat High Court, the other side may say, well, it has not considered this, not considered that. But according to me, the Allahabad High Court, and if we see the tribunal's order, everything has been considered by the High Court. Then in Siva Industries and Holdings, this is a case which distinguished the special bench, especially by relying on the case of Walford Shares and Stockbrokers, which is a Supreme Court decision. Reliance was placed on the decision of the Honorable Supreme Court, wherein in para 18 of the said order, one may note this para 18, so has held that for attracting Section 14A, there has to be a proximate cause for disallowance, which is its relationship with the tax exempt income. It was the submission that there was no proximate connection between the interest paid by the assessee. So this was the submission on the basis of this para between the interest paid by the assessee and any dividend income, as the assessee had not received any dividend income, nor had it claimed any income is not includable in its total income. So after upholding this argument, now I'll read 4-5 lines of this as to how even they have interpreted the term does not in a positive way, that is 14A will not apply. When computing the total income as per Section 5, the income should be received or deemed to be received or accrued or arise or deemed to arise any income during the year or accrue or arise to him outside India during the year. An investment which does not give rise to any income deemed to accrue or arise, so it says which does not give rise, cannot form part of the total income and therefore cannot form income which does not form part of the total income under the Act. So this is how they have interpreted the section with the words does not. Thus, once there is no claim of income which does not form part of the total income under the Act, there cannot be any disallowance in relation to an investment which may or may not give rise to any income which does not form part of the total income. In the present case, it is noticed that none of the investments made by the assessee has generated any dividend income which has been claimed by the assessee to be not to form part of the total income. In such circumstances, as it is noticed that the assessee does not have any income which does not form part of the total income, nor has the assessee made such claim, we are of the view that no disallowance under 14A can be made on the assessee for the relevant assessment year. So in Shiva, they distinguished the special bench. They followed the Bombay High Court, the Supreme Court, which was followed by.
Shiva was post-special, right?
Sorry.
Shiva was post.
Post.
It was available at that time.
Yes. It has distinguished. I have not taken it, but it has distinguished came in West, which has been considered by the Allahabad High Court tribunal decision. Now we will come to the position in our state, Bombay. Now there is a decision in the case of Commissioner of Income Tax versus Delight Enterprises. This is a not reported decision. Here the question of law was whether on the facts and in circumstances of the case and in law, the Honorable Tribunal was right in deleting the disallowance made by the assessing officer of interest paid by the assessee company on borrowed funds amounting to overlooking the fact that the borrowed funds were used by the assessee company to invest in the capital of another partnership firm, and since profits derived by the assessee company from a partnership firm were exempt the Income Tax Act, the interest expense related to such tax-free profits is to be disallowed under 14A. So the question of law was not very categorical, but if one sees the finding, it says on facts we find that there is no profit for the relevant assessment year. Hence the question as framed would not arise. So because there was no profit for the relevant year, this is the entire text of the decision. They said that the question does not arise, that is 14A will not apply. Now because it's a very short decision, I have taken the tribunal's, sorry.
Here the words, now again they are misconceptualizing as profit. The word actually is income.
Income.
So as we said, income can be negative also.
Correct.
So there is even either the partnership firm has not done anything if there is no profit or no loss at all. Or even if there is a loss, then again there should something be in relation to that income which is negative.
Correct. Correct.
On facts, I think there was no profit, no loss in there.
Yes. We'll just see the question if we can.
If it is loss, then yes, I agree. What you are saying.
No. There was a loss. There was no income. There was in 1 year there was no exempt income. There was no income at all. In the other year, there was some taxable income, but ultimately whether there was a loss or not, that is not coming out from the facts. But there must be a loss because now we'll see the. Yeah. So we'll easily come to know. No, I don't have the decision.
You don't get the facts from that also. Whether there was a loss.
There is a law, then definitely department can argue there is some expenditure incurred in relation to that income. Suppose we say
Yes.
loss.
So what Bombay High Court has essentially is gone is whether there is any profit, positive profit, as he said that 14A does not talk about netting off. So if only there is a positive profit, so you first see the profit and then go towards the expenditure. So suppose there is nothing on the credit, then 14A will not be applicable at all. Then you have to go whether it will be allowable under 36(1)(3) or it will not be allowable or not.
Here the word used is income.
Correct.
It is not profit.
Correct.
So if it is income,
Yes, it will include a loss.
debit also.
Yes.
So whether can this be relied?
Relied is very short.
Yes. No, but because it's a short judgment, it is a little cryptic judgment. But then this decision has also been followed by the tribunal subsequently. vis-a-vis the special bench. So yes. So in this case, the argument of the revenue was the return of investment made in partnership form is exempt under section 10(2)(a) of the Act and thus does not form part of the total income, and hence any expenditure incurred in relation to earning of non-taxable income is not allowable in terms of section 14(a). For assessment year 1-2, he submits that the assessee has not earned any income whatsoever during the year from the partnership concerned. So the argument was, because you have not earned income, irrespective of 14(a), you cannot get any expenses, and thus no expenditure is allowable. For 2-3, assessee had earned interest income which was taxed as business income by the CITFE. The judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Rajendra Prasad Moody was considering the allowability of expenditure under 57(3) and not under. So these were the arguments by the revenue. The tribunal's finding was, in this case, for both the assessment years, there is no income earned by the assessee which does not form part of the total income under the Act. Under these circumstances, we do not see any reason why the claim of the assessee is not allowable under 36(1)(3). Coming to the argument of the learned DR that the judgment of the Honorable Apex Court in the case of Rajendra Prasad Moody is not applicable to this case, we find that the Madras High Court in the case of Ethurajan has held that the proposition laid down in Rajendra for allowability under 57(3) are equally applicable for deduction under section 36(1)(3). Thus, this argument of the revenue is without any merit. So, this is the it was followed in this case, in the case of Avshesh Mercantile Private Limited versus Deputy CIT by the Mumbai Tribunal, wherein it had considered the special bench as well as the High Court decision in the case of Delight, and it was held that 14(a) is not applicable where there is no tax-free income. Now, of course, so as far as High Courts are concerned, we already have 3 High Courts, Bombay, Gujarat and Allahabad, which have held that if there is an income which is exempt under 14(a), if there is no income which is exempt, then 14(a) will not apply. However, I have taken the special bench because it has happened several times. For instance, even with the case of DEPV, where the Supreme Court chose to follow the special bench in the case of Topman Exports, and they did not follow even the Bombay High Court in the case of Kalpataru Colors. So we'll just go through few aspects of the special bench, and then we will see what is the ultimate consensus on this issue. Now, what the special bench first says is, when prior to introduction of 14(a), an expenditure both under section 36 and 57 was allowable to an assessee without such requirement of earning or receipt of income, we cannot import any such condition when it comes for disallowance of the same expenditure under 14(a). For this proposition, they give this analogy which I have taken, which is there in the order itself. It is true that the court, while considering the expression for the purpose of making or earning such income, held that in order to claim deduction under the aforesaid section 57(3) of the Act, it is not necessary that income should have actually been earned or made. The actual earning or receipt of income on parity of reasoning would also not be a condition for disallowance of such interest under the provisions of section 14(a) of the Act, which employs the expression in relation to income which does not form part of the total income. The ratio of the decision can be used in the converse situation also to hold that even if no income were received, expenditure incurred can be disallowed under section 14(a) of the Act. So this is how they dealt with the Supreme Court decision, by logically conversing it and saying that just like there is no income, expenses can be allowed for the purposes of 14(a). So essentially you have to see the objective of the expenditure. You have to interpret income as source of income, and if that be so, if you take the converse, then just because there is no income doesn't mean there cannot be any disallowance under 14(a). This is the first finding of the special bench. Then they say that the terms in relation to is very wide, and therefore it would also include even if there is no taxable. Then I read D, where they interpret the words does not. It is a very technical they have gone. Whether the words does not appearing in the term income, which does not form part of total income in 14(a), excludes a case of no earning or non-receipt of income from its ambit. When there is no income, it cannot form part of anything, and certainly does not in any case form part of total income. In a contrast, to put it differently, can one say, does it form part of total income? The answer is no. The words does not of course denote the present situation and not the future events as apprehended by the learned counsel to have been contemplated or attempted by the revenue. In present tense also, somebody had said present tense. So they say even if you will take the present tense, also no income or non-receipt of income does not exist in something and therefore cannot form part of assess's total income under the act of the year. Not because of its exemption, but because of its absence, and it is a fact. So they say it's like we say what is darkness? It is absence of sunlight. So that darkness is also a fact. So they say having exempt income or having no income is also a fact that you have made some borrowings which have gone towards investments which could have reaped the tax-free income. So if we put this absence also in does not and then read the entire section, it may sound different.
Then probably it would end up in such a thing that I have made one investment
Yes.
which is not going to earn me any exempt income. But since there is no income for that investment is here, there should be a disallowance.
That is what the special bench says.
Exactly.
That is what the special bench says, and they have justified this through these analogy. In such a situation, it cannot be said that no disallowance is to be made or that the disallowance is resorted to by the revenue in relation to future income. It is for the present current year's total income, which does not include the income from dividend as PC because of its absence. A thing which is absent cannot exist, and therefore it also cannot form part of the total income, and consequently does not form part of anything. Then they say, it is thus clear that from whatever angle one may look at the transaction, result is the same, that is when the dividend is not taxable at all, the interest pertaining to that would also not be allowable because there is no taxable income of the assessee against which such interest can be allowed. The another way to consider the issue is that if interest is allowable, it would be allowable against dividend income, and the net dividend income after allowing that alone would be excluded from the total income. Section 14A was inserted to clarify this intention of the legislature to set the existing controversy on the issue at rest. Then they consider the High Court of Delight. They consider the Bombay High Court also, and they distinguish it. What the High Court has held is that the question framed does not arise. It does not hold that where no exemption is claimed, there can be no question of application of provisions of 14A of the Act. In any case, the tribunal held that interest income was taxable as business income under 28(4) of the Act. And in that context, the tribunal held that in this case, for both the assessment years, there is no income earned by the assessee which does not form part of the total income. Under these circumstances, we do not see any reason why the claim of the assessee was not allowable under 36(1)(3). This case does not help the assessee at all. So they distinguish the Bombay High Court. Then they distinguish also the Mumbai Special Bench in the case of Daga Capital. Because what Daga Capital had said is that you see the exempt income. If there is no exempt income, don't fall into the trap of 14A. Daga Capital categorically says that. What the special bench in Chem Invest says that Daga Capital said it because there was an exempt income. They did not analyze a situation where there would not have been any exempt income, though there are investments which could get you exempt income. So this is how they distinguish Daga Capital also. So this is what the special bench has given the various analogy as to why 14A would apply even when there is no this thing. Of course, this is the entire jurisprudence on this point. I believe there would be a consensus that 14A would not apply when there are 3 high courts. Or does anyone feel some parts of the special bench really would click with the Supreme Court, and that one point could also make a lot of difference in the entire outcome of the decision?
Which were there before Chem Invest, all those have been considered in this decision.
The arguments are not considered because what the tribunal has to essentially consider is whether they have to follow the jurisdictional high court or they have to follow the special.
All these arguments might also be there before the high court from the department side.
Yes, we do not know if they have argued because as we pointed out all the judgments of the high court, none of the high courts have really reproduced the arguments of the revenue.
It is not a
And
It is not coming out.
correct, and also they have not reproduced this order. Therefore,
But they have
for
considered
Allahabad,
those
yes.
decisions.
Therefore, for Allahabad High Court, I pointed out the tribunal decision wherein they had considered Chem Invest and Shiva Industries, which had distinguished Chem Invest vis-a-vis the Godrej Boys and the Supreme Court. So, therefore, all these decisions together are important if we come across this situation, rather than going only with one decision of the Bombay. Probably they have not filed SLP because it's a old decision. If you will see, yeah. So there is. I haven't checked if they have filed, but according to me, they have not filed. Yeah, of the high courts which we have covered, none of them till now have gone to the Supreme Court. I checked that, but Delight I haven't
Recent
checked.
one, na, so
Yeah.
we come to know only after a few days.
Yeah.
I have different investments. See, I have investment, 10 types of investment. For one investment, I have borrowed money. And I have got this dividend income. For other 9 investment, I have also borrowed money. For
Okay.
I am not interested in investment.
Yeah. I've just compiled few case laws. There are several case laws on this point, but I've compiled few, like first the applicability in Rule 8D, that satisfaction has to be recorded like point wise on applicability. Then it does not apply to Chapter 6A deductions. So I'll cover your point because it comes in this. Then third member, that it applies to stock in trade. Of course, now the High Court will have, Bombay High Court will have to take some view on this. Then it is not applicable to share application money and not applicable to depreciation. On computation before Rule 8D, because the burden is on the AO to show nexus between expenditure and the tax-free income. Then there is a decision wherein 1% of the total exempt income has been computed as disallowance. And that presumption in Reliance Industries that interest-free and interest-bearing. Then there is one more decision where 2%, Mumbai Tribunal, 2% of the exempt income has been taken as a disallowance. So these decisions I have just given it. At the last minute it can really help someone to argue 1%, 2%, 5% aggravate. Yes. Because what happens otherwise to research these cases of 1%, 2% is very difficult. Then there has to be, then many times the matters are remanded to the AO. But in remand the original, it cannot, AO cannot exceed the disallowance made in the original computation by him, assessment by him. Then as far as interest is concerned, of course now there are a lot of decisions of Calcutta Tribunal, Chennai, Allied and all, but the foundation of all those judgments is this judgment in the case of Champion, which says that only that interest which is relatable to the tax-free income has to be taken for the purposes of Rule 8D.
Champion also goes further and says that if you are able to identify that the expense related to taxable income, that will not be considered.
Correct. Whichever way you see.
We say
Yes, because what Rule 8D2 says is that it has to relate to the tax-free income. So now suppose if I do a borrowing, most of the time we know the specific purpose for which it is borrowed. Then in the case of Priya exhibitors, suppose now many times we see there are no expenses but there are demat charges. Now they may be 2000, but if you apply 0.5%, though it does not apply anything, it goes a lot more time beyond that. So in this case, what they said that unless AO disputes that the demat charges which I on my own have disallowed is incorrect and there is some more expenses, common expenses, only then he should apply Rule 8D and go to 0.5%. Otherwise, he should accept my disallowance of demat charges and should not go on the Rule 8D at all. This is what they say. Then, sir, for your query, I feel this would be relevant. The Kolkata Tribunal, what they say for Rule 8D2 and the rules, only investment on which tax-free income is earned is to be included. So those investments on which you do not receive any tax-free income should not go into the computation of Rule 8D. And then last is JK Investor Bombay. It is there on itit.online.org, where same thing had happened. Assessee disallowed demat, etc. AO must point out how assessee is wrong before invoking the Rule 8D. So these are just the case laws, handy case laws which you can immediately take if you come across a 14A case. Now, in relation to this, there is one more case law. This is a judgment of the Bombay High Court, 6th March 2014. Now, in the Bombay High Court, after a very long gap, they had constituted a tax bench. Must be from the 1st of March. And on the 6th of March, the Bombay High Court got an occasion to deal with 14A also. Of course, the bench constituted of judges who did not have much experience on the income tax side, though very competent. So, well, now we'll see the decision, and it will really scare all of us. Now, first I'll go to the facts of this case. On perusal of the balance sheet, it was noticed that the appellant had an investment of rupees 16 crore 73 lakhs. The stand was that the appellant had earned exempt income on this investment, and therefore the assessing officer invoked 14A, read with Rule 8D of the Income Tax Rules 1962. The appellant, so a show cause notice was given to the appellant to explain as to why the expenses related to exempt income should not be disallowed in terms of these provisions. So as usual, the assessing officer asked why Rule 8D should not be applied. So the natural explanation is that we have not incurred any expenses, so Rule 8D should not be. Now we'll see the explanation given by the assessee. A letter was addressed on 19 November 2010 in which a list of the companies from whom the appellant received dividend was given. These companies were the group companies. The dividend amount was mentioned, and it was submitted that in the previous year preceding the present assessment year, there were no borrowings made by the appellant. It was further submitted that all these were old investments. So so according to you, is this submission sufficient? Means if we see usually what submission we give, was this a sufficient submission towards stating that don't invoke Rule 80 because there are no borrowings, these are all old investments, and I also give the list of the dividend, probably to show that there was no perhaps expenses incurred to earn these dividends. So of course there can always be 1 or 2 points more, but according to you all, was this a sufficient explanation enough for really shifting the burden on the assessing officer to point out the nexus of the expenditure?
Sorry? The calculation as to what about indirect expenses, or why no expenses of indirect nature are incurred for us.
Okay,
It was
so
only taken care by the fact that there were dividends were received from the group company.
correct.
There was nothing which I.
That must be the reason why they must have given the list of the dividend. But of course,
You will have to explain that that was directly credited into my account. There was no physical.
I did not
Did not
give
have
the due to go and do the
there was no administrative.
Correct. I think that was the idea.
okay, so what the Bombay High Court, then of course the claim was rejected by the AO, and he invoked Rule 80 and made a disallowance of 7,83,000. The assessing officer thus calculated the tax. Now what the High Court has said is, we have perused the concurrent orders with the assistance of the learned counsel for both parties. We have also perused the contents of the letter dated 19 November. The assessing officer has referred to the balance sheet. The assessee has earned an exempt income. Therefore, an explanation was sought as to why the expenses related to this income should not be disallowed. The reply of the assessee was that no expenditure has been incurred vis-a-vis the exempt income. So, this was the explanation which I see in all the cases. The assessees are giving that firstly no expenditure is incurred. It was further explained that even there are no borrowings. Therefore, you don't invoke Rule 8D and make any disallowance under 14A. The finding of the assessing officer is that this contention is not acceptable in view of insertion of Rule 8D of the Income Tax Rules. What has been urged is that there is no finding recorded, and which is the prerequisite for the purpose of invoking Rule 8D. We find that in that regard, a specific stand taken in the letter has been considered. The CIT appeal has also in paragraph 5 of his order held that disallowance has been worked out because the rule applies and only those investments should be taken into consideration from which maximum income is earned. Once the appellant assessee before us has not segregated such investment before the assessing officer or before the commissioner, that the addition made was upheld. I don't think so. This is really an essential test for 14A. when you are seeing the expenditure and when I have claimed that I have not incurred any expenditure. In these circumstances, rightly holding and reiterating this factual conclusion, the tribunal did not commit any error. We are of the opinion that the judgment in the case of Godrej and Boys Manufacturing Company Limited deals with the issue of constitutional validity of the provision in question, namely 14A and Rule 8D of the rules. In that context, dealing with the challenge, the division made the observation relied upon. The application of the provisions therefore depends upon the facts and circumstances in each case. In the present case, we find that the rule has been invoked based on the assessor's own stand which has been recorded. It is not as if without the prerequisites been satisfied that the assessing officer, CIT or the ITAT has applied the rule in question. Now, according to me, this decision has an impact because I have seen in all the cases, this is the standard explanation given by everybody that they have not incurred any expenditure and some explanation is given. So, according to me, now we must give further explanation and go to the depth of everything rather than thinking that some burden is on the AO, some burden is on the assessee. That way.
Not incurred any expenditure, your onus becomes, you claim that there is no expenditure. The onus is far greater because
Yes.
The language of this rule is that if you either is not satisfied or there are no expenditure incurred.
Yes.
So to that extent, you have a greater responsibility to show why you are claiming that no expenditure.
But once I have also said about borrowings, I have also said no expenditure. And from balance sheet, what is the item which he really found which could have gone? You see, it is, once I give a detailed explanation, then there has to be something more. Because if this decision is taken as it is, according to me, 90% of the cases 14A read with Rule 8D will be confirmed.
You are saying that the assessing, the ITU has to a great extent, this thing, he has said that it is applicable to 8D. And therefore there is a finding.
Yes. So basically, assessing officer, he does not really record a finding. What the High Court has done, they have imputed a finding on the ground that, oh, he has considered a letter. So it is as good as a finding has been recorded by rejecting that letter. Now, according to me, all the tribunal decisions on finding are not on that footing. They really say that assessing officer has to record a proper finding. That yes, some expenditure. Yes.
Whether the tribunal decision which says that there is no expenditure incurred at all, then there is no onus on the assessing officer to do anything which is to improve because there is nothing, no calculation given. There the AD is rightly removed as a tribunal decision to that. All the decision which we are talking about is there is some disallowance made. That disallowance is substantiated. And when it is substantiated and the assessing officer just says that I don't agree with this or
Correct.
then the tribunal says that this is not the way of invoking rule.
Correct.
Where you have
So according to me, in this case, if you see the explanation, if something further was required, could have been called. Correct. You don't just consider a letter and say that because Rule 8D is introduced. See, I am saying you see the impact. There is a letter filed by the assessee. Assessing officer considers the letter and says, no, I will invoke Rule 8D. Not with the intention of recording a satisfaction, but because Rule 8D is mandatory. Now these findings, if they are approved by the High Court, I am saying one has to take note of this judgment also and try to distinguish or try to. Yes. Yes.
From what you said, that once he gives you a show cause notice saying that why I should not do it, he is not going to ask you again that now give me further explanation to this.
No. He is not going to ask you. But once you give an explanation, and if he does not agree with the explanation, either he can pass the order. Correct. Correct. At least the CIT appeal should have appreciated that. They have gone on the line that Rule 8D is there, invoke it. And this is approved by the Bombay High Court. That is what I am trying to point out. Of course, they are filing an SLP, but yes.
There the language is such that if you don't disallow anything, then Rule 8D automatically, if the assessing officer is not satisfied, it gets invoked.
Correct. So therefore the court says, correct. Therefore the court says that he has to record his satisfaction. He is not satisfied, he can invoke Rule 8D. Correct. But he,
What is, if you read the section, what it says is that satisfaction is to be recorded only when you have disallowed something. Then you will have to put your disallowances.
correct. You are saying
When you have
that.
not disallowed anything, you can directly go to Rule 8D.
No, but in a case
No.
where there is no expense at all.
See,
In both the cases, it has
Why
to
will
be
it
there.
be disallowed?
see, if my
Both
case
the-
is that there is no disallowance.
One case is to
That
say
my
that-
case. So that belief has to be disbelieved by recording some satisfaction that why there is no.
One is that I have disallowed some expenditure. The AO says, no, I don't agree with your calculation. I will invoke Rule 80. The other is, I say there is no case for disallowance. Then I don't think so that this is a better case scenario wherein he can directly go under Rule 80.
So, no expense scenario is not, we are talking about no expense scenario, right? When
Yes.
there is no expense, there is a question of disallowance.
Correct. So he is saying in that case he can directly go under Rule 80. According to me, he
Even if
cannot
you go by
go.
the section itself, am I claiming any expense? When I am not claiming any expense, the section says no deduction should be allowed.
Correct.
Where I am claiming that?
So you are not even passing through 14A1.
No expense in connection with the exemption.
Exempted.
I'm not saying that. That of course, Varshik income tax office has last few years thinking that even if there is more expenses,
We have calculated to charging.
charging it.
आले तो नहीं.
Once we give some working, then yes, he has to deal with that and say why it is not correct.
That is what I am saying, that in this case, quite a lot of working was given.
See, even in a case where there is no limit charges also. For example, it's a
Maybe
private
after reading this decision, we may have to supply something further. Whether he asks or the assessing officer demands, we need to give the.
Yeah, that is the whole point, that we have to be more cautious now. Rather than simply making bold statements that we have not incurred.
Once you have a show cause notice, giving a routine reply will not help.
Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
that's the
correct.
Once you have a show cause notice, giving a routine
Yes.
reply will not
You
help.
have to
Will
deal
not.
with all these aspects what we have just now seen. We have to give the explanation on all these points. This is also not the if you go here, then you will not find any expenditure. Even if you try to take something else, that is also not satisfied. That way we have to.
Obviously, in the accounts, if there are certain expenditures, you will have to show about all these expenditures.
Yes.
Not in relation
Not
to this, but
relation.
it is directly.
Therefore, I
related to
said
my
rather
other
than going
activity or
into the
something
arguments
like
of
that.
burden, it is better that we explain our accounts.
The champion judgment, it actually goes to the extent of saying that the calculation of rule D can be modified to this much extent.
Correct.
Champions, Kumar has gone to the extent that
Yes.
the definition,
No, no, he is also the author of that judgment of Kolkata REI, where he says you take only those investments, don't go opening and closing.
that is also very good judgment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is very good for computation, therefore I have taken.
That is the only judgment which says you can modify
Modify the-
calculation of Rule 80 by applying this.
Correct.
So when you are giving something, you can actually, even if you have not made any expenditure at the assessment stage, you want to fight it out, you could actually give them a working of Rule 80 in the modified format so that that can be fightable at the later.
No, but according to me, your stand is you have not incurred any expenditure. It is better not to give any working. Because the moment you give working, there is a Mumbai tribunal decision which takes it as an agreement to.
Excellent.
So, you maintain your stand, whatever, and it should be a plausible stand at the end of the day.
Sorry, once you give
There is a judgment of Karunakar Rao wherein the assessee had given a
Working.
Coming to zero.
and according to me had mentioned it as without prejudice.
Without
working.
prejudice, actually.
Karunakar Rao said that because you have given the working, it means you are accepting this much disallowance.
So that is an aberration of law.
That is-
So sometimes you really
Actually,
But we have to take care of all the
in
cases.
that case, the assessing officer had demanded that if you do this working, what will be the disallowance? So in that context, the SSC replied by giving that working too. But that
Even in that
working,
scenario, it was coming to zero or it was coming some.
some
Some-
amount or something it was.
So they say once you accept that certain expenses have gone towards your earning of tax-free income,
Oh,
now you cannot
without-
say that
without
nothing is
prejudice,
income.
They said no, we will accept.
No, but see, suppose in a situation where you give a working, in which you explain in detail that this expense is incurred to this expense for this, and therefore ultimately zero disallowance. I think that working is also working, not necessarily that you have to
certain-
disallow.
No, if it is zero, then no problem with the working. Na? What is the
No problem, right? No, but then
Of course.
Before going to rule
If it is
80,
zero, then whether you
No, my
put
point
rule
is-
80 or whatever you put.
Section.
what he is saying is
In rule 80,
no,
yeah, yeah.
not 80.
In normal.
You go to the extent of saying all these expenses are related to this taxable income.
And that will be probably sufficient for him not to go to rule 80 at all.
Yeah, yeah, correct.
Unless
And then he will have to put in extra efforts to go to rule 80.
unless it comes to some different satisfaction by
Correct.
recording some
Correct.
finding that your explanation
efforts-
or your
The ball is
expenses
in
what
his
you are
court.
saying
Yes.
is not in
A lot of efforts to
relation.
come
Yes.
to
This is
That's
so.
what I mean.
Yes, yes.
That's
then the burden is on him to
Yes.
disprove your
Correct. That's
correct.
what I'm saying.
or your explanation.
The next decision is we are taking this JM Financial.
Let's say stock in trade का thing. There is some dividend income. Can I take it? No, I don't want to claim the exemption. I will take it as an exemption. The quantum is too less. To save myself from litigation.
Correct.
When you are saying it is exempt income, it doesn't form part. I don't think
I'm not
Yeah.
claiming the exemption.
Yeah.
I don't think that.
I think
See, according to me-
it is exempt. You don't need to-
No.
I think there is one tribunal decision which is saying that if the person offers it as an income and एक है वो unreported है but I don't go by the logic. I don't accept that. I will try to find out. कहीं ना कहीं है.
No, but I to a great extent would agree. Like several times, suppose
But do we have that type of option under 14A?
No.
See,
no, suppose even in 40A1, suppose you don't claim the expenditure and it is disallowed. Correct. See,
Rahul,
according to me, your computation is sacrosanct. If something is not there, you cannot fiddle with it.
exactly, there is no option.
So if I do not claim something,
What they say, if you have not claimed, you will not get it at a later stage. Yes, I am not claiming anything.
I got it's the play of the amount.
But if you at the law read somewhere, they say that dividend is to be taxed income from other sources.
Correct.
What he
Correct.
is talking that we consider as business income.
Yeah, if it is considered as a business investment.
No, even if it is a business income, even if it is in the hands of a share broker, dividend is always treated as income from other sources.
So if they say moment is income from other sources, then the
No.
14A etc.
So here question was whether exempt income. So can you say?
14A is not related to source of this
Often
thing.
for taxation.
14A is as such not confined to any head. It applies to business income as well as other sources as well as
Whatever sources.
No, according to me, the only argument which could prevail is that the exemption is by virtue of law. Otherwise, it is a taxable income, and therefore, if you don't include in your computation, there is a mistake. It is wrong.
Make a mistake in such a
It is
fashion that
really not a choice. It is really not a
you
choice.
Make a mistake in such a fashion that it ultimately benefits you.
Correct.
Then IPO will say.
Because
So something which is taxable is you first include it and then you exempt it.
Slide 5, there is, we have, the courts have said that the SSE did not make any claim for exemption of any income from the payment.
According to me, it is the statement is pertaining to the fact that there was no exempt income. Well, I do not know how. Otherwise, how much to.
If I have made an investment in a partnership firm, I get interest as well as share of profit after tax. What would be the position? Because part of it is
Correct. So therefore, earlier for 14A, this is before Rule 8D or
Vishnu and Mahajan will come. Vishnu and Mahajan social will come.
sorry.
Vishnu and Mahajan social
Yes,
bench.
yes.
He's saying that there is a composite.
Correct. Still
it is
14A will apply.
Both. Share of profit as well as there. I think Vishnu Mahajan's decision special bench which says that it has to be
Ahmedabad special.
proportionately disallowed.
Yeah. So 14A brings in that concept of proportionate disallowance between taxable and non-taxable.
Yeah, but in that case, suppose there is two, when fixed capital is for 5 lakhs rupees, and further I am giving loan to the partnership, then I can take that amount is restricted only the fixed capital.
Correct.
But the loan I am giving, that argument has been put up in front of this. That has been accepted.
On facts, you don't go by facts. If the facts are such, then yes.
Because every partnership is there is capital, their fixed capital is 50,000%.
So if it is on facts,
Then this is a decision of the Mumbai Tribunal. This case, during the year under consideration, the assessee earned dividend income of 14,14,000, which was exempt under 1034. The major investment of the assessee company, out of the total investments, which was 97.82%, was termed as strategic investment in unlisted subsidiary companies and joint venture companies, and were long-term investments. According to assessee, no expenses are incurred for maintaining the portfolio of these investments or for holding the same. Hence, no disallowance under 14A can be made with respect to these investments. However, the assessee on its own accord had disallowed 1,40,000 because there are some expenses like directors meeting or this and that. So they had disallowed, they had worked out the entire disallowance and made 1,40,000 under 14A. However, the AO did not accept the disallowance made by the assessee and proceeded to make the disallowance under 14A by applying Rule 8D. Accordingly, the assessing officer made the disallowance of rupees as per Rule 8D of the income tax rules, and it was confirmed by the CIT appeal.
Mention the amount also. So it shows
No, that is
7 crores.
So it is there, no?
No, that's what I'm saying. Just say it here.
You want me to say the amount? 7 crore 61 lakhs.
14 lakh dividend, 7 crores of disallowance.
Yes.
One of the arguments in this Godrej was whether
Yes,
when
yes.
they were discussing on constitutionality.
Correct.
The one Justice Krishna Iyer's one judgment was argued. Is there any madness in this rule? If there is a madness in the rule,
Correct.
then it will be unconstitutional. According to me, what more madness you want?
Actually, in that there were a lot of examples given from the both sides.
I know.
But the examples given from the revenue side prevailed more on
More
the
on that, correct.
judge's mind.
The AO was required to record the satisfaction that the claim of the assessee is not correct. See, because what happens is constitutional validity, it is a difficult aspect to declare any law to be constitutionally invalid, because there is a presumption that all laws which are passed are constitutionally valid. So once we challenge the constitutional validity, lot of things are approved which otherwise would not have approved had no constitutional validity been challenged. The AO was required to record the satisfaction that the claim of the assessee is not correct, having regard to the accounts of the assessee, and only if the AO is not satisfied with the explanation offered by the assessee with regard to the accounts, he could apply Rule 8D. So on the point was satisfaction about the expenditure. In support of the contention relied upon the Bombay High Court in Gujarat Boys, wherein it was held that subsection 2 does not ipso facto enable the AO to apply the method prescribed by the rule straight away without considering whether the claim made by the assessee in respect of expenditure incurred in relation to income which does not form part of the total income is correct. Thus, the Honorable High Court has held that where the accounts of the assessee furnish an objective basis for the AO to arrive at a satisfaction in regard to correctness of the claim of the assessee of the expenditure, there would be no warrant for taking recourse to the method prescribed by the rules. Then the argument was that the major investment is in the unlisted subsidiary companies and not much expenditure was incurred. And then the assessee had also relied on the decision of Garware Wall Ropes. And decision of the Delhi bench in Oriental and all. Then the arguments of the revenue was that once there is Rule 8D, that Rule 8D will apply, and all the arguments of the assessee cannot be considered. However, the tribunal held that for the year under consideration, the assessee has specifically raised the point before the AO that 97.82% of the investment is in the subsidiary companies and joint venture companies, and therefore no expenditure was incurred for maintaining the portfolio on these investments or for holding the same. The assessee has also pointed out that these investments are long-term investments and no decision is required in making the investment or disinvestment on regular basis, because these investments are strategic in the subsidiary companies on long-term basis and no direct or indirect expenditure is incurred. The department has not disputed the fact that out of the total investment, so an explanation was given, it was for the department to rebut, which they did not rebut. Not disputed the fact that out of the total investment, 98% of the investment are in subsidiary companies, and therefore the purpose of investment is not for earning the dividend but having control and business purpose and consideration. Therefore, prima facie the assessee has made out a case to show that no expenditure has been incurred for maintaining these long-term investments in subsidiary companies. The AO has not brought out any contrary fact or material to show that the assessee has incurred any expenditure for maintaining these investments or portfolio of these investments. It has been made clear by the Honorable High Court that subsection 2 does not ipso facto empower the AO to apply the method prescribed straight away without considering whether the claim made by the assessee is correct. So these were the findings of the tribunal. So now this is another aspect under 14A, while one is computing the disallowance or looking to the applicability, that one has to see the nature of investments also. That if mainly the investments are in subsidiary companies, then a plausible argument is that no expenditure has been incurred for the purposes of maintaining these investments. Then I have just given the
in the same case,
yes.
the previous year,
Yes.
they have claimed the expenses.
In the
not given the details of the
Correct.
Then we will do the
Correct.
8DA.
Correct. Sorry? Yeah, there were 2 years in the earlier. Therefore, if you see, they begin for this year. The assessee has given an explanation because the earlier year this argument was not taken.
Argument was
Not
taken.
taken.
Totally.
Correct.
It do that line.
Correct. Now, this is a decision. If you see the question of law, whether the shares invested through a portfolio management scheme in the circumstances of this case resulted in gains taxable as capital gains or as business income. Now, these portfolio management services are there. They are working under the SEBI regulations. Now, there are 2 types of portfolio management services. One is discretionary, one is non-discretionary. In discretionary, the portfolio manager takes all the decisions. In non-discretionary, assessee has or the investor has a say in the decision making by the portfolio manager. Now, a portfolio management agreement is entered into. Money, a fixed sum, a lump sum is usually handed over to the portfolio manager, who thereafter invests in the stocks and securities. He uses our demat account because the power of attorney is also executed along with the agreement, and he does not take any responsibility of any loss or whatever happens. So basically, he acts as an agent of the assessee. Now, the question is, according to, of course, we'll put it as a discussion, that the moment I give, say, money to the portfolio manager and enter into an agreement, should I be considered as an investor or should I be considered as a dealer? Because we all know that portfolio manager, he enters into several transactions. Or should the events which take place by the portfolio manager as to frequency, volume, etc., should be considered for the purpose of determining whether the gains are short-term or business income? Or should the assessee argue that I have given money to portfolio manager, I don't look into
shares
it?
also. You can give shares also to PMS manager.
Yes.
Not money, you can give your own portfolio to manage.
Yeah, own portfolio. Because if one says that agreement stage one should determine, then the argument could be that, well, you've given money to somebody, you don't even know the fate of it, where he is going to invest, what he is going to do. So this is really a business venture which you have done to a great extent. You are expecting profit maximization rather than any kind of wealth maximization. The other way around is to say that if only the events after is considered, then there are chances, if the frequency and all is very high, then they all may be considered as a business income, though your initial intention would have been only as an investor. For instance, as a lawyer.
There is no active involvement also.
Yeah, there is no active involvement also, but the problem is that he acts as an agent. So his actions are as good as your actions.
No, but the question is if I intend to take some professional help to maximize my return, that does not in any way change the nature of the investment person.
So according to you, what has to be seen is what is done by that professional. Not of course.
What is my intention in doing? My intention is to maximize my return.
Correct. So you have engaged an agent. The transactions are as good as your transactions.
I'll give you a simple example.
Yeah.
You invest you give a loan to someone on your own and you want 10%. You get an agent who says I'll give you 18%, you give me 1% commission. Does the second transaction in any case become a business? No. Similarly,
Why? Why would it not become? Because then you want to maximize your profits. I am saying for the sake of argument, you cannot simply rule out that no, there is no business idea before it.
No,
Because
yeah. See, ultimately, the overall nature of my investment is that I want to earn interest. It's not that what is the point of getting 10% and I'm getting 17% to do that particular person.
Correct.
So it's not fair of the relation. The
Yeah.
question is that, like you said, whether it's discretionary or non-discretionary. If it is
discretionary,
where every decision is taken by him, then there is a greater case of saying that it is not business, I'm just doing it for investment. He takes the decision. Ultimately, my intention is to earn returns. But where I involve myself, that for every decision.
I used to think exactly this way.
Yeah.
But after, of course, going through this decision, Because one legal aspect which is to be seen is that whatever the portfolio manager does, it is as good as you are doing. And see, otherwise, you've given him the money, okay, thinking that he'll maximize the profits out of this money. You don't even look into the transactions which he enters into. Correct? Usually an investor is supposed to be someone who is very cautious. Right? He would not give so much of his money, not even bother to see what he is doing.
You also said you get report after 3 months.
Correct, correct. So usually a trader or someone who has that risk-taking capacity would engage a portfolio manager. Otherwise, mutual funds are also there. There is no straight-jacket thing, but I am saying there are various ways in which it can be seen. Correct. So
mutual fund is more risky than portfolio manager.
that
Definitely not that.
And in case you're giving someone else to play.
correct, correct.
Here the judge is no name,
Gambling
is
on
the
the-
man. And there I know that I don't know what he's doing.
Correct. At least here after 3 months I know what is it.
No, here there is SEBI has
No, that way
portfolio
mutual
management.
fund also you can
The
do.
SEBI has put in a lot of rules in place that it needs to be audited, it needs to be
To control the-
control is very effective on portfolio management. So per se,
Yeah, that can be one factor, the scheme of the entire regulation, to show that this is for the protection of the investors. And yeah, of course, I take that argument. Now, what happened in this case is, assessee is a partnership firm engaged in the business, so it was doing some other kind of business. See, this also is, according to me, an important fact. If I am a lawyer and I give to portfolio manager, it means that it's an investment, not really a business venture. Yeah. Assessee entered into PMS agreement with Kotak Securities Limited. I have dealt with one case of Kotak. Like, they really don't mention in the agreement whether it is discretionary, non-discretionary, nothing.
maybe
Because
sign on the dotted line.
yeah, because according to me, if they write 2-3 clauses like this is for your wealth maximization, for growth, this is discretionary, maybe the litigation can really, it will show the intention of the parties to the agreement. The AO, after selecting the case for scrutiny assessment, found on 18 November that the gains realized by the assessee on sale of shares were in the nature of business income and not capital gains. The assessee in its reply, the assessee replied, assessee directly went on the transactions which were entered, stating that these are because the fear of the assessee was that because he is my agent, and if I say that if I go only on the agreement, then I would be presumed to be a trader. So he said, rather than taking that course, let us examine my transactions. So his was that he showed it as an investment, not a stock and trade, own funds and delivery based. The AO, by his order, he treated it as a business income, allowed the PMS charges. It was reasoned that for the purpose of portfolio manager was to optimize returns of the investor, since the motive of the transaction was the earning of profit and not a dividend, where the holding period was ranging from a few days to few months. It was concluded that the income was business income earned by way of adventure in the nature of trade. The commissioner confirmed the order of the AO. The ITAT also confirmed the order of the CITFL and reasoned that, this is interesting, it says that at the time of deposit of amount, the intention of the assessee was to maximize the profit because, first, while the assessee enters the PMS as investments in the books of account at the time of depositing the money, the assessee does not know what specific transactions will be entered into by the manager. Second, that the assessee finds out the details of the transaction only after 3 months have expired, and only at the end of the year can the shares in the demat account be entered into the books of account. Third, the assessee has no control over the shares bought or sold under the PMS. So this is seeing the entire thing from the other perspective.
Now when you say there is no control, can you say he is my agent? Because an
Yes.
agent is supposed to work under the constant direction of the principal.
Correct.
And if you go to the agreement, then some of the agreements they mention the range of profitability which they are going to give.
That can really support a case
Somewhat
for,
of a relation
yes,
that
it's an investment decision.
only to,
If the agreement can be made more elaborate,
But normally they don't do, because the moment these types of things are there and tomorrow you don't get for any reason, you will sue that particular.
there is always a line below that, which is in a smaller font, it says that this is just an indicative based on less 15 years.
Because
This is
on
not an
that-
assurance. This is not an assurance.
They just give you assurance, yes.
This is not an assurance, they will say. This is a tentatively.
I mean something they mention in that.
That care they will take. They have got two advocates like you.
Now with the SEBI regulation, I think they've said that you can't.
You can't guarantee.
Yeah, you can't guarantee, but you can give an assurance to that extent.
So even I have never seen any agreement wherein they are guaranteeing
Assurance.
I've seen.
assurance.
I've seen agreements where they give a guarantee of 12%, and then when they didn't get it, they actually paid out of their pocket. You implemented that.
Third, the assessee has no control over the shares bought or sold under the PMS, and thus the portfolio manager enters into transactions on behalf of his clients to maximize profits. From this, the ITAT inferred that it cannot be said that the assessee had invested money under PMS with intention to hold shares as investments. Then before the High Court, the arguments of the assessee were the transactions. Now because the tribunal read the entering into the agreement or the deposit in a manner which made assessee an investor as a trader, so the assessee went ahead and said, oh, let us not go with the agreement, let us go with the actual transactions. Whereas, of course, in Bombay, like our tribunal in the case of KRA and ARA holdings, have considered these arguments and held that, well, at the time of deposit and the agreement, all these arguments make you an investor and not a dealer of shares. Same arguments. Arguments of the assessee. The transactions must be considered by themselves while applying the, and therefore in those cases, they really did not go into the frequency and all these arguments. They stopped at the investment stage, the deposit stage. The transactions must be considered by themselves while applying the test to determine whether they are investments or adventure in the nature of trade. It is urged that the PMS agreement by its term alone or by fact of agency being handed over to the portfolio manager cannot be the basis for inferring an intention to profit or that the transactions are in the nature of trade. Of course, then the arguments of the revenue, they went on the frequency and everything. In the findings of the High Court, clause 7, so they analyzed the agreement. They said that the two clauses indicate, because as I said, Kotak usually, what I have seen, they don't mention discretionary, non-discretionary. So the first issue the High Court addressed is from the clauses that this is a discretionary portfolio. Unlike a non-discretionary, the manager has full discretion to invest in respect of client's account in any type of security and make such changes in the investments as he deems fit. Then another clause which said that not be responsible for any loss or expenses resulting to one person as client from the insufficient or deficiency of value of or title to any property. Then while the agreement entered into between Radial and Reliance, so this was the another company with which also there was a portfolio, appears to be a discretionary portfolio because there it must have been mentioned, as indicated in clause 9, by which the client unconditionally and irrevocably grants power of attorney to the portfolio manager to make decision on the investments. Clause 10 states that the portfolio manager provides no warranty as to the appreciation of the securities in which he applies the client's fund. Therefore, it is clear that a PMS agreement can be an instrument by complete authority and discretion over the transactions to be entered into is surrendered to the portfolio manager. From the terms of the agreement, it does not emerge that the intention of the investor is to make profits. The terms on the other hand indicate that regardless of the level of discretion handed over to the portfolio manager, there is neither any guarantee that the securities invested in will appreciate, nor is the portfolio manager responsible to the client for any loss from the deficiency or value of the securities. Thus, the PMS agreement at best embodies the intention to appoint an agent with limited liability who will invest on behalf of the investor and nothing more. So what the Delhi High Court said is, don't read much into the agreement. Only the agreement is to appoint an agent. It will not determine whether you are an investor or for that matter even whether you are a trader. The fact that no inference of an intention to invest can be made from the agreement does not translate to the intention to trade in shares for profit either. So it says, while a transaction may be motivated by the intention to resell at an enhanced value, it would not be possible to evaluate whether the transaction was actually in the nature of trade until the securities are actually resold. So this is quasi transactions entered into by the portfolio manager. Moreover, in a discretionary PMS, it becomes all the more relevant and necessary to evaluate the intention of the assessee in conjunction with his conduct and other circumstances, since the intention of the assessee cannot be ascertained at the time of depositing the money in the investment, because the actual sale and purchase of securities happens at the hands of the portfolio manager or mere agent. So they say he is a mere agent. Mumbai tribunal says this is some kind of a special agent. You cannot call him a mere agent. Since the intention of the assessee cannot be ascertained and the investments are made by the portfolio manager with the knowledge of the assessee investor in a discretionary PMS, the manner in which the securities have been treated by the assessee can and ought to be evaluated only post the fact of investment and not at the time of depositing the money. Then finally the court has concluded the PMS agreement in this case was a mere agreement of agency and cannot be used to infer any intention to make profit. So they say analyzing the entire thing at the stage of entering into the agreement should not be done as far as PMS is concerned. The intention of an assessee must be inferred holistically from the conduct of the assessee, the circumstances of the transactions, and not just from the seeming motive at the time of depositing the money. Along with the intention of the assessee, other crucial factors like the substantial nature of the transactions, frequency, volume, etc. must be taken into account to evaluate whether the transactions are adventure in the nature of trade. Therefore, the block of transactions entered into by the portfolio manager must be tested against the principle. So then, what we have to do is all the normal way in which one analyzes whether it's a business gains or capital gains. Now, this is as far as our Bombay High Court is concerned. This question has been admitted. Tribunal is in favor, but of course now in view of the Delhi High Court, the PMS transactions have to be viewed in the way in which Delhi High Court has done it. So whether on the facts and circumstances of the case, the ITAT was justified in holding that the income earned by the assessee by a portfolio management scheme was liable to be assessed under the head capital gains instead of being assessed under the head profit and income. This question is admitted. Now I've just because now even in this case, what ultimately we have to see is the frequency of the transactions, whether there is borrowed funds, own funds, etc., several conditions. Now, I have given these case laws from the perspective of the tribunal, of course, because it is very important that we know how every member of the tribunal views these transactions, which facts they give more importance, which facts they don't give more importance. So if your matter is before a particular member, you know whether to take his own case law or not to take his own case law in your facts. So I have given all the members more positive. Few members whose names are not there, I have not found any favorable case law.
These are all favorable.
Only favorable. Why should I take any?
You should have also given against.
Yes.
So that we know that which case should not be cited before which case.
No. So therefore, what I have done is now suppose you take the first Sanjay Arora and Vijay Palka. You know this case law, he has decided in favor. So you try to match your facts to the greatest possible extent. So why go into their negative decisions? Right? So I have just given like IPO, like in this case, assessee had invested in lot of IPOs, 10, 12. So the argument was that he is a trader because he is constantly investing in the IPOs. So they had said that no, even though he will be an investor. Then second is on borrowed funds, even though there are Bombay High Court decisions, but I am given the members like if you give them their own decisions, borrowed funds. Then third decision is that even though there was 143.1 in the earlier year, they have accepted it as a consistent position. Then in FNO, of course it is offered as business income, but though FNO is there, they have said that assessee is not a dealer, and so on. So almost all the member wise, so whichever bench you can at least have a start.
Or you don't share this with anybody. Actually,
Similarly for 14A.
Yeah,
I was
14A
going to
also
say that.
good case.
I was going to say that.
wonderful.
Yeah.
This is
Still one of them.
this is on this is case on reassessment. The Gujarat High Court. In this case, the assessee was a cooperative society registered under the so and so. It had filed a return of income which was assessed under 143.3, and within 4 years, notice under 148 was issued. Now the reasons for reopening was that there was an amendment whereby unabsorbed depreciation they had put a time limit. which was later on taken away. So the essential argument was that suppose beyond 8 years you adjust it, whether you have to see the law of the year in which you are adjusting or the law in the year in which it arose. So on that basis the reopening was done. The petitioner filed its objections. The objections were, of course, I have not seen them dropping 148 after filing objection. And then assessee filed the writ petition. So the arguments of the assessee was, first argument was that the assessing officer has applied his mind, so it's a change of opinion. And second argument was that Gujarat High Court has already taken a view that time limit will not apply. And the arguments of the revenue were that in original assessment this issue was not examined and notice has been issued within 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. And question of sufficiency of reasons cannot be examined by the court in writ jurisdiction. So the High Court gave its findings. First they say that just because some mention is there of unabsorbed depreciation in computation doesn't mean that he has examined this legal aspect. So they said on this the assessee would not succeed. But on the second ground, they say however we find much force in the alternative contention of the petitioner, namely that the issue itself has been decided by this court in favour of the assessee. In similar circumstances in the case of General Motors, the court was examining the validity of reopening. Of course, such notice was issued beyond a period of 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. Nevertheless, when the ground on which present notice is founded is held to be invalid in law, in our opinion, the very foundation for issuance of notice will not survive.
Income is not escaped.
Yes. Now, of course, this is the important part of the decision. Now, this was all, but because the Gujarat High Court was dealing with a batch of petitions, so they have laid down certain guidelines also. Like as you are aware that under 148(2) the reasons have to be recorded, but there is no provision of supplying those reasons to the assessee. Therefore, the Supreme Court said that no, these reasons have to be supplied, subject to assessee filing the return of income pursuant to the notice and also asking for those reasons. So, of course, though the legislature did not provide, the judiciary had incorporated those conditions under 148. However, Gujarat High Court came across situations where because of all these things, objections and everything, the assessments were delayed and it went on, like till the time 3-4 days or 1 week, 2 weeks before the last day of completing the assessment. As a result of which the quality of the assessments were getting affected. So, it can thus be seen that there are 4 important stages once the assessing officer issues notice for reopening of the assessment. Such stages are: the assessee, if he so wishes, may demand the reasons recorded by the assessing officer after filing return in response to the notice, then the assessing officer supplying such reasons, objections, and then disposing of the objections. Now, the stages at 1 and 3, which is asking for the reasons and filing the objections with the assessee, the remaining are the duties of the assessing officer. So they say with a view to streamlining this procedure and to ensure as far as possible the assessing officer is not faced with the unenviable task of completing the assessment proceedings in a few days left before the same became time barred, we would like to give certain directions. And they say that these directions do not go outside the ambit of what the Supreme Court has said. It is within those directions we are laying down these directions. So first they say, under the circumstances, once the assessing officer serves to an assessee a notice under section 148 and within the time permitted in such notice the assessee files his return of income in response to such notice, then the assessing officer shall supply the reasons recorded by him for issuing such notice within 30 days of filing of the return by the assessee without waiting for the assessee to demand such reason. So whether or not the assessee demands, because we have seen this litigation goes on even at the appellate state that reasons are not given, he should give, he'll say he had not asked for, and then you have the rule 46A and then again the entire thing goes on. So they say irrespective of whether the assessee asks or not, assessing officer within 30 days should provide the copy of the recorded reasons. Then once the assessee receives such reasons, he would be expected to raise his objections if he so desires within 60 days of the receipt of such reasons. Now if the objections are received, then the assessing officer must dispose of these objections within 4 months from the receipt of the objections. This has been done in order to ensure that sufficient time is available with the assessing officer to frame the assessment after carrying out proper scrutiny. the requirement and the time frame for supplying the reasons without being demanded by the assessee would be applicable only if the assessee files his return of income within the period permitted in the notice for reopening. Likewise, the time frame for the assessing officer to dispose of the objections would apply only if the assessee raises objections within the time provided herein above. This, however, would not mean that if in either case the assessee misses the time limit, the procedure provided by the Supreme Court. So they say that even if it is not followed, nothing, assessee does not lose out any rights ultimately, but this is the procedure which they are prescribing. Then, last they say the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax and Cadre shall issue a circular to all the assessing officers for scrupulously carrying out the directions contained in this judgment. Now, for Gujarat state, according to me, these are the guidelines. Now, somebody files a writ in the Bombay High Court, or sir can pursue with CBDT or something like that to have it nationwide, because this is very important to supply recorded reasons without asking. Because I have seen lot of times either people forget or people don't know that they have to ask for the copy of the recorded reasons. And also the time limit. These things are very useful. Either a suitable amendment should be brought to prescribe the time limits, because unnecessarily so many disputes are going on the recorded reasons only, even till the appellate tribunal stage, and then the tribunal remands the whole matter to the assessing officer, supply the recorded reasons. So if proper amendment is brought stating that he has to supply, this is the time limit, then this judgment is in very good spirit, should be implemented nationwide. So there is another decision. Now, as I said, there is no time limit or when the recorded reasons have to be submitted. Now, many times, like the question according to me is, should you have the recorded reasons before you file the return pursuant to notice under 148, or should you be made to file a return pursuant to notice under 148 without knowing why you are made to file it?
You go by weekend, then you have to file.
But what do you mean?
Ideally, actually,
I personally feel that if they supply me with the recorded reasons, then I can very well make a decision whether to include in my return or not to include in my return.
That should be ideal.
There is one decision where the petitioner had refused to file the return. So what they say, Delhi High Court, the petitioners did not file any returns of income in response to the notices issued under 148. Then of course they rely on the Supreme Court. The petitioner would get the reasons recorded for reopening only upon filing the return of income pursuant to the notice. So first stage is notice, then return, and then recorded reasons. Though according to me, ideal thing should be, along with the notice, they should supply the recorded reasons, because recorded reasons are anyways recorded before the issue of the notice. They have to record before the issue of the notice under 148 too.
What is clean is important.
Sorry?
You come out clean is important. You are coming out clean is important. If you intend to hide something,
So what ultimately when they lose and they make assessee to go through everything?
There can be a case where if you are informing the reason that this is the reason, and I feel like yes, fine.
I don't want to, okay, I'm ready.
Yeah.
Because once
Let
they
it
issue
be off.
notice and then once the entire cycle starts, then you are into it.
Once you offer in your return on it, then he has to just accept it. Everything.
changing this situation, is supply of reason prior filing of return, will also have some implication on penalties. Because the penalty is the penalty
Correct.
process is the
But-
assessee will say I have declared in my return, and they will say it was post this 148 that you have declared.
Then the entire point can go on detection, but ultimately penalty is not the purpose of the income tax act, like a penalty or starting prosecution.
There will be some issues on there also.
Can the return file under 148 can be revised?
Sorry?
148 return can be revised also.
Can it be revised?
I don't think so.
Tell you why reason. Let's suppose you give reason.
No, it cannot be because
Just understandable. Listen, why?
After getting the reasons you
Let's
file.
suppose the Hawala case had 25,000 rupees transaction reported to me when they gave a couple of reasons started. So 25,000 don't want to go through the mail and those things. So can I file a revised return?
No, but then that income can be offered otherwise also. Without filing return, you can always offer
You
it.
can file a revised computation and you can offer it.
revised return cannot be filed for the 148 because 139.
No, without going into the legal argument, how to sort out that situation.
general.
In computation you can offer.
So there is no need for a revised return.
Yeah, but in 140, whether I can say that I am accepting this 25,000 as income. So now you can close that.
So that is the point.
Whether that can be done.
See, once
The other income part.
what happens
Can
once
you avoid other income? I saw this pointing out
once
that-
the return is filed,
that I accept the addition of 25,000 or 50,000, but please save me on the other issues. Don't.
but how do you know that?
That is not possible.
Most of the times it is not possible.
That is the reason why they don't give you the reason. Because
No, no.
you don't make that addition. Supposing there is a reason given to you, you feel that reason I accept and I accept. The question is now when you reopen your case, you will not be able to make any additions on that issue. Because you already accepted as per the Bombay High Court.
My point is, why do they really want to go ahead and make addition? See, you understand my point. You are thinking from the point of the revenue that one should come clean so that they can levy penalty also, they can start
That is
prosecution
not the whole
also.
intention actually behind 140.
Suppose you
Intention is supposing you have one point in mind when you are drafting the 140.
see, because this is not like some cash credits or something. This is income escaping assessment.
You find out 4 other things. Now that 4 other things can be added only if I made an addition on the first point.
Correct.
Expression 3.
Yeah.
No, what you are saying is perhaps the reason why.
I think a smart guy would do is this point is smaller point. I have to offer it for and I don't get into any assessment. Even if you pass me
Still
an
he will
assessment,
have to,
No.
Still he will have to complete the assessment. Na? Once you file the return offering that particular.
No, once return is filed, then the process will start 143.2 and everything.
No, I agree. But then the question is the other additions which we made will be legally invalid. He'll have to issue one more for 148 for the other issues.
No. Nothing like that. Once.
No, he's saying they because of date there were.
No, he's correct.
Even then.
No, what he is saying is that
Is there?
if no addition is made
On
on
the
the ground on
purpose
which there is reopening, then other grounds cannot be taken.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
So
what
your 148 when you are accepted, when I accept
Correct.
it, that is as per my return only. So
Correct.
I am not making any addition in addition to that.
Correct. So yes. So one of the purpose of reassessment is that they can again assess the entire
Entire.
income.
Any other, they can
That
touch
can-
upon any other issue.
Any other issue.
Yes. That can also be. So of course this Delhi High Court judgment says that no, you have to file the return, only then you become entitled to the recorded reasons, and they have accepted your argument. Then this is also a judgment on reopening. In this case, for the assessment year 5/6, the return of income was filed and 143.3 was passed, and the claim of ATIA 4 was allowed to some extent, to a greater extent. Then the tribunal and 148 notice was issued. It was issued on the basis of insertion of a explanation to subsection 13 of section ATIA with retrospective effect from 1st April 2000. The petitioner objected to the reassessment. Finally, the writ petition was filed. Now, the argument of the revenue was notice under 148 came to be issued on March 17, 2010, which is within a period of 4 years. So, this is a case within 4 years. There was no conscious consideration with regard to allowability of the deduction, taking into consideration the amendment to section ATIA 4, which is not possible because it came subsequently. So, AO could not have considered something which is scrutiny assessment, and therefore this is not a case of change of opinion on the part of the assessing officer. So the revenue's argument was that it is not a change of opinion because he never considered this amendment, and then they go that on merits that he is a works contractor and therefore deduction under ATIA 4 cannot be given to him, because as per ATIA that amendment is a works contractor will not get the deduction, only a developer will get. The argument of the petitioner was that assessing officer cannot assume the jurisdiction merely because the amendment has been brought making it effective retrospectively, even if it is held to be clarificatory in nature. Then these are the decisions on which the assessee had relied. The findings of the High Court are: the assessing officer on a detailed scrutiny had explained the claim made by the assessee under section ATIA 4 of the Act. This was also challenged further before the CIT appeals and the tribunal. The sole question therefore is whether the reassessment proceedings can be initiated only on the basis of insertion of explanation, which had been substituted by the Finance Act 2009 with retrospective effect from April 1st, 2000. Such explanation clarified that the deduction under ATIA of the Act would not be admissible in the case of an assessee carrying on the business in the nature of a works contract. So the first point with the High Court said that this amendment is a clarificatory amendment, and this is an explanation which only clarifies the section which it was from the beginning. And if it clarifies, then of course it is a change of opinion. Such explanation having held to be clarificatory in nature, the ratio laid down in Parikshit Industries, which said that it would apply, while deciding the issue of virus, the judgment rendered was taken note of. The assessing officer initiated such proceedings of reopening solely on such ground of insertion of explanation, and therefore it needs to be held as mere change of opinion. So they say that whenever there is an insertion of explanation from retrospective effect, and if assessing officer while making an assessment has not considered that explanation, then it is nothing but a change of opinion, because this is not an amendment of law. This is only insertion of an explanation which is clarificatory. So there will always be two views, and if one view is taken by the assessing officer, and if that particular view or the correct view is clarified by the legislature subsequently, then it cannot be said that there is no change of opinion. Now this is, they relied on this judgment, Parikshit Industries, wherein it is explained, it is now a settled law that if an explanation is added to a section of a statute for the removal of doubts, the implication is that the law was the same from the very beginning, and the same is further explained by way of addition of the explanation. Thus it is not a case of introduction of a new provision of law by retrospective operation. We have found that the petitioner had disclosed all the materials regarding its activities, and there was no suppression of materials. In spite of such disclosure, the assessing officer gave benefit of the provision by considering the then explanation, which was substantially the same, and thus it could not be said that any income escaped assessment in accordance with the then law. We have already pointed out that the assessing officer has now given him a second thought over the same materials in accordance. So what they say that if there is an explanation which only clarifies a particular position, and if assessing officer has taken one particular view, then even though the explanation has been inserted with a retrospective effect, it will amount to change of opinion. Now this is one decision of the Bombay High Court. This is amendment now. This is not insertion of a clarificatory amendment, retrospective amendment. K. Mohan and Company. The question raised by the revenue was whether the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal was justified in cancelling the reassessment proceedings initiated by the assessing officer beyond the period of 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year. The assessment was sought to be reopened on account of the retrospective amendment to Section 80 HHC introduced by the taxation laws with effect from 1st April 1998. The finding, this is the only judgment, entire judgment. If the legislature amends the provisions of the Act with retrospective effect, it cannot be said that there was failure on the part of the assessee to disclose fully and truly all material facts relevant for the purpose of assessment. So now,
this might be pertaining to a situation where provision
correct, beyond 4 years. So,
beyond 4 years, what will be the situation?
Exactly, that is my query. According to me, if we go by the Gujarat High Court, then introduction of an amendment, not an explanation, will be.
Clarificatory amendment, yes, it's a change of opinion.
Otherwise, it will
amendment
yes.
per se.
And within 4 years, then according to me, it will not be a change of
It is
opinion.
an open issue. It is
Yes.
possible that it will be rejected.
But drawing the logic from these decisions,
Sorry?
drawing the logic from the decisions, within 4 years, if it's an amendment, not a clarificatory amendment, but a new provision altogether, with a retrospective effect, then the two options is, one is to declare the amendment as prospective, or reopening would be valid. Okay.
The same thing which we are
Same.
So no longer it
it
is.
seems that way. This is, beyond 4 years, yes.
Of course, these are few decisions within 4 years explanation. And this is the last decision. So this is a decision of the Supreme Court of CWT versus estate of late HMM Vikram Singh ji of Gondal. Now, of course, he is a Maharaja. He is Maharaja. And the moment we see Maharaja, read Maharaja, we want to know little more about him apart from his case law.
Especially when it is well taxed.
Yes. Of course, we are dealing with income tax in this case. So Gondal is a place in Gujarat, and this Maharaja, they've been there for past from 1600, and now they have got 3 hotels over there. They converted their palaces. So the committee should think of having this thing over there in the palace, RRC in the palace now. So and if we go there, we can meet his son, which is also mentioned, Mr. Jyotendra Singh Ji. He is greeting all the guests to go to Gondal. So in this case, the ex-ruler of Gondal, Vikram Singh Ji, executed 3 deeds of settlements in the USA and UK. These trusts were created for the benefit of the settler, children, remoter issue for the time being in existence of the settler, and any person for the time being in existence who is the wife or widow of the settler, or the wife or widow of the husband or widower of any of them. This is a case pertaining to a discretionary trust. Now, under the scheme of the Income Tax Act, if it is a discretionary trust, it is the trustees who are to be taxed unless the AO gets an option only when the beneficiary shares are determined and they receive the share. Only then the AO has an option of either assessing the trustees or the beneficiary. And when trustees are assessed, they are assessed at the tax rate of the AOP. So in this case, the essential challenge was that both father and son, they were offering the income in their returns of income of the trust. Later on, they said that, well, as per the scheme of the act, the beneficiaries have not received anything, and this is a discretionary trust which was created in UK by late Vikram Singh Ji, and therefore nothing should be taxed in their hands. So they say the said income was also included in the 2 returns filed by his son, so both that were included. Thereafter, the assessee took the stand that the income from these trusts is not includable in his income. Jyotendra also took the stand that inclusion of the said income in the return submitted by his father and by himself for the assessment year was under a mistake. Clause 3. So what essentially the tribunal, which had decided against the assessee, had held that for several years they had not fulfilled the condition of the clauses whereby they were supposed to appoint trustees and distribute the trust property or distribute the income generated to the trust. So tribunal said that you cannot keep it in eternity and then still continue to claim that this is a discretionary trust. However, the High Court held that no, it will continue to be a discretionary trust. The High Court did not agree with the tribunal's view and held that on interpretation of the relevant clauses, character of the trust was discretionary and not specific. On appeal by the department to the Supreme Court, it was held a discretionary trust is one which gives the beneficiary no right to any part of the income of the trust property, but vests in the trustees a discretionary power to pay him or apply for his benefit such part of the income as they think fit. So essentially what they say is that under a discretionary trust, a beneficiary does not have a right, but the trustees have the power. That is how it is, and no obligation. The trustees must exercise their discretion as and when the income becomes available, but if they fail to distribute in due time, the power is not extinguished so that they can distribute later. They have no power to bind themselves for the future. The beneficiary thus has no more than a hope that the discretion will be exercised in his favor. Having regard to the above legal position about the discretionary trust, which is also applied by this court in the earlier judgment, and the fact that the income has been retained and not disbursed to the beneficiaries. This is important fact. It is to be seen that the amount is not disbursed to the beneficiaries. The view taken by the High Court cannot be said to be legally flawed. Merely because the settler and after his death his son did not exercise their power to appoint the discretion, the character of the subject trust does not get altered. The 2 UK trusts continue to be discretionary trust for the subject assessment years. The High Court has taken a correct view that the value of the assets cannot be assessed on the estate of the deceased settler. So it has to be assessed in the hands of the trustees in cases of a discretionary trust. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you.
We are thankful to Rahul Haqqani for leading this session. We are thankful to him for giving us the exhaustive notes and presenting in-depth analysis of all the 6 case laws. You all will agree to me that this was a good learning session and a consensus can be arrived to present a hearty vote of thanks to Mr. Rahul Haqqani. With this, I on behalf of you all present and Chamber of Tax Consultant propose a hearty vote of thanks.
Thank you.
All really wonderful.
Excellent,
Really,
excellent.
really
And the way in which you have given,
Wonderful.
Good knowledge bank.
Not in all.